All
This
right, so
meeting is being recorded.
let's make
All
a
right,
formal introduction for our listeners. Good afternoon, Aret. My name is Claudio. I'm calling you from Washington, D.C., from the studios in Fairfax City. We're very humble, grateful that Aret Madilian accepted our invitation to the show. Aret, welcome to the show, man.
thank you. Thank you. Hello,
Aret,
Claudio.
as you know, the last 2 years with the COVID, the vaccine, people believe in the vaccine, some people don't. It had been, crazy times, if you're a tour musician, you couldn't tour. Millions of people died all over the world and so on and so forth. How have the COVID affected you, your family, your life as a musician? How are you holding up your sanity?
Oh, the last part of the question is the best, the sanity. Um, well, it's an insane situation on many levels, I think. But living away from cities and the countryside hasn't affected me as directly as it has others who are actually living in more populated areas where going to work, coming home, going out, doing the simple stuff of everyday life was quite complicated. Whereas where I live, I'm away, I'm in the countryside in Normandy, on the coast of northwestern France.
Yep.
Uh, Life was basically the same as it is when I'm working on an album, because it's sort of, when we're doing an album, most of my time is spent in the studio, and when I take breaks, it's to go out to do something very simple and come back. So it didn't affect me directly in that sense. It affected us obviously on quite strongly, because a lot of the shows were canceled.
Yep.
Especially because we had just released our last album called Sentinel.
Yep.
And that came out in January 2020, and we were in the midst of a small tour we had already started in Belgium, Germany, Holland, and France. And when we came back for a break during the early part of the year, we were also preparing a small off show with the French actress Fanny Ardant. We were supposed to do a concert reading with her on, if I remember, it was the 27th of March in a theater in the city of Rouen in Normandy. And we were just a few days away from that show when the first lockdown happened. So basically that was the main effect on us. An important show that we were preparing with Fanny Ardant got cancelled. Actually, it got delayed. We ended up doing it later on, but other than that, I think it was just an insane time on a mental level, because I thought that there was a lot of ugliness that showed its face, and of human nature. A lot of, I don't know how to explain it. It was a very confused moment. People were not being as honest with one another, afraid of one another, suspicious of one another.
Yeah.
And all that was quite disarming, because, you'd expect that we'd be a bit more mature about all this.
Yeah. People were, I think, supposed to scared and very protected. They don't wanna get exposed, get sick, die. And I suppose
That's understandable. That part of it is completely understandable.
Yeah.
It's just sometimes the forms that it took and the fears started taking over common sense.
I got you. Yeah, understand. Let's go back to the beginning. Were you born like in a musical family? I mean, how old were you when you perhaps began taking piano lesson or guitar lesson, or how music came to your life?
Actually, I didn't take any lessons. I'm self-taught on many of the instruments that I play. I'm not good at all of them. I'm better at some than others.
Yeah.
Well, when my parents migrated to Los Angeles, I was 13 years old,
Yeah.
Migrated from Istanbul.
Yeah.
I come from an Armenian and Greek family.
Yeah.
And so when they migrated, I was 13. It was quite a culture shock because it was an extreme cultural difference, you know, from Istanbul to Los Angeles. Basically, you are almost at extremes of West and East.
Correct.
And yeah, so it was a lot to take in at once as a young boy. But music came to me very quickly because I was already very passionate about music as a boy. I remember my mom used to, when we were in Istanbul, my mom used to buy 45, you know, vinyls when I used to come home from school, and she used to hide them in the apartment where we used to live. And my job was to find what she hid somewhere in the apartment so I can find it. And I would spend the rest of the afternoon just, you know, playing it on our record player.
Good for you.
I was sort of designated DJ of the house.
Yeah. And then you end up. Yeah. Go ahead.
So when I came to when we came to LA, when you love music as I did, everything was even just huger, bigger, because it was like the back end of the 70s, 1977, 76, 77. So there was still a very vibrant, you know, back end of the 70s culture, the musical culture, very present in LA. The whole, you know, surf culture, the music coming in from coast, and the radio stations playing all this music that I had, you know, not been exposed to as much in Istanbul. And the first encounter, direct encounter, was very funny. It was one night when my parents were visiting my uncle. Actually, it's my father's first cousin, who was very passionate about music. He was probably in his late 20s at the time. He had bought one of those two-level organs, you know, like the Hammonds.
Yeah.
Do you remember them?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I remember after dinner, he had like set up a studio type of area in a room where it was only piano and this organ, and he was playing it, and all the lights on it and all the buttons and all the interesting stuff really caught my attention, and I was just mesmerized just watching him play this thing. And apparently I was so mesmerized that when we got home, my father asked if I'd be interested in playing an instrument, and if you know, and I said yes. So he bought the same organ to the house, and we had, you know, so I started playing on my own. Just it became sort of my instrument, the two-level organ with the pedal and all that. And I started experimenting with, you know, mixing the different instruments on it, and just that's how it started. It was the first time that I was really actually on an instrument. I was really playing an instrument, and then I started very quickly. Instead of wanting to learn other songs, I don't know why, I just wanted to create stuff. So I created some music. Then I was recording on a cassette recorder, and then I met up by chance a girl who was the bass player of some punk band, who introduced me to a man named Spot. And Spot was the in-house sound engineer of the record label called SST Records. And SST Records was the home label for bands like Black Flag, Minutemen, Husker Du, and all those bands at the time. And Spot heard what I was doing. He was much older than I was. He must have been 35 or something at the time. And because he was always in this very heavy, hardcore punk scene, he said, you know, I should record some of your stuff, which was totally different. It was more electronic. I really got into Kraftwerk, and I got into all the music we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And So it was more electronic, and plus I was on a keyboard, and I had bought a synthesizer by then. I was, between the ages of 13 and 18, I discovered a lot of electronic music. And one of the bands I used to really listen to at the time, and their first album was Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, OMD.
OMD, yeah.
And their first album, I think it was called Organization or something like that. And it had Enola Gay and Electricity in there on that album. And I remember getting, interested in synthesizers, Kraftwerk, and some other bands like Ultravox, early Ultravox, and Magazine, and all that. So I had some synthesizer experimentation, recordings, and he started, getting interested. So we recorded with Spot. He had a open session one evening. They call it the graveyard shift, between midnight to 8 in the morning. It's the cheaper time for recording.
Correct, yeah.
Was at the time. So he had a cancellation or something, so we ended up making a record together, a 12-inch 45. Wow. And it came out under the name of Vogue Sahara. And it got more attention than I thought it would get, because it was really just an experimentation. And so that's how I really started getting involved, and I put my first band together in LA called WOG, W-O-G, with a friend of mine who was also from Istanbul, and he was really into Joy Division, much more so than I was. So, and I was more into OMD, so we had this mix, a band that sounded like a mix of Joy Division and OMD influenced music. Yeah, so that's how it all started.
Yeah.
In LA in the early 80s.
And then how you end up, so what happened from Los Angeles to end up living in France? What happened there?
That's a vast question. I'll make it really short. It just, in 1988, I had enough of LA, not because, I like LA in many aspects, but there's a lot of things I don't like about LA. The whole money culture, the 80s was very yuppie, the yuppie culture, which was very all money and shiny things, and it sort of wasn't my cup of tea. So I wanted to see other things. I wanted to see Europe. I had it back in my mind for years to go to Paris, because I used to also, besides music, I used to be really interested in the movies from Europe. There was this channel in America, in LA, called Bravo Channel, and they used to show foreign films. So I used to be really interested in foreign films to see what was going. And I had listened to some music from Europe as well. Older stuff, French music, and films by the French directors. So I guess I sort of fantasized about Paris like a lot of people do. And so in '88, I decided to go to Paris. I was 24, and then things happen. You meet people. You meet a girl. You meet and I ended up staying, and it's sort of like a very long vacation. I've been here since 19.
I hear you, man. Something happened to me similar too. I ended up chasing a girl and end up here in the States. Now I have all my life here in America. I'm a U.S. citizen and everything.
Exactly. We always forget those little elements that are absolutely determinant. They determine the whole life sometimes. So that's what happens.
How you end up meeting Beatrice and Gerard?
Beatrice and Gerard. My meeting with Gerard is very, very strange because when I was in Paris, I think it was early 90s, I got a phone call from Gerard, whom I didn't know at the time at all. He said he had found me on this machine they have in France, which is called a Minitel. It's like kind of like it's like the ancestor of the internet. Yeah. Very, very basic. And he called me because we share the same last name.
Correct, yeah.
So, and he wanted to meet me because of that. I mean, there was absolutely nothing musical about our phone call because we didn't know each other. And so I refused the first meeting because I didn't want to meet anyone at the time, and I was sort of in my own world, trying to, I was in my own world, and I refused it at the time. I had made some silly excuse of being busy or whatever, because I didn't know who this guy was.
Yeah, of course.
And a couple of years later, in '95, I think, he called me again. And this time I felt really bad and that I had already refused him. I said, this guy sounds pretty nice. I really should make an effort to meet him.
That's right.
And I did. And it was wonderful because we started talking about our names and how, because it's a very rare name. It's not a common name, last name. So we're trying to, talk about, our past, our ancestors or what have you. And that my parents, from the father's side, come from the Black Sea, up above Anatolia, northern coast of what is presently Turkey, the Black Sea, and his parents as well were from, his father's side. So we assume that, we probably have links from our great-grandparents. And, but quickly, when he asked me what I was doing, when I said music, the conversation stopped, and he said, "Oh, well, so do I. I'm also a musician." At the point, we just stopped talking about our families, our names, and we started talking about music. And then he said, "Would you like to see what I do?" And I remember walking in Paris, and I said, "Yeah." So we ended up going to his place, and it was like the cavern of Ali Baba. He had duduks and instruments from Armenia, from the Caucasian regions, and he started playing the duduk. It's a wind instrument. I don't know if you know it, but it's a
No.
it's a wind instrument that you find in that region, made out of an apricot tree, and it has this sound which is very close to the human voice, and it has a lament to it. It has a lament quality to it. And it's quite piercing as far as emotionally speaking, the sound of it. It's very, very deep and profound. So I was really drawn to it. I'd heard about the instrument, but I'd never seen somebody play it in front of me before. So at the time, I was still experimenting with a lot of music, but I was sort of on a hiatus, just not doing much, just hanging out in Europe, trying to figure out what I'm going to do, doing jobs here and there, working in a restaurant, working in a leather store. So I asked him to come out, and we started experimenting. So that's how I met Gerard. And in '97, I was invited to go back to Los Angeles with a small recording deal from a very independent small label who was interested in some of my piano compositions I was also doing on the side. That I was just, I wasn't really doing it to produce them, but I had done some stuff, and this guy I met listened to it, and he had a small label, and he wanted to record them. So I went back to LA for a couple of years, and when I came back to France, I didn't want to live in the city anymore, so I rented a house in the countryside. It was 10 times cheaper than living in the city, and I had much more space to be able to do music and actually start putting together a proper studio. And so Gerard was coming out from Paris to spend some time with me to experiment on recordings, which is when I met Beatrice. I met Beatrice because she was a friend of a friend who had come to spend a weekend at the house at the time. And she was quite musical, and she was singing with this friend of mine who was playing piano, and I really loved her voice. I got really attracted to her voice, and I asked her if she would be willing to try do some recording sessions on a few pieces I was working on, which became the first songs of Deleyaman when the band was actually officially founded by me, Beatrice, and Gerard.
Got you, got you. And then how difficult was to put that record or yeah vinyl at the time or recording at the time together? It was difficult to put it together. It was difficult to finance it, or
You know, to be honest, at the time I had given up on all uh, anything that was musical industry ish.
really?
I wasn't really concerned to find a label. I wasn't worried about. I just wanted to do something which I really liked, and that's it. And so I was basically more concerned by the quality of the what we were doing than the financial part of things. At least when it all started, I was really concerned. I just wanted to do something because it was. I felt that this was my second chance, so to speak, of making music the main activity of my life, the main reason of my life. So I was really concerned that what we were doing was just good for ourselves, that kept us passionate about what we're doing. So I wasn't thinking any mercantile or any commercial, viability about it. But once we started, working on it, once it started taking shape, I did recognize that it had a sincere quality to it. It was sincere. It was coming from a place which was very sincere, which was what I liked most about it. I mean, there are a lot of imperfections in that first album that I could, I could record over again. But what it did have that I can't take away from is the sincerity. And what's sincere, that you're not afraid. When you're doing something sincerely, you're not afraid to
Yeah,
share it with the world.
exactly.
And it really doesn't matter what happens to it. It's just there, it's sincere, and it's there for whoever wants to take it
Yeah,
or listen to it, which is what we did. We went all the way with the recordings. I mean, I was really serious about the recordings, though. I mean, I wasn't doing this as a hobby. I was really doing this, very, very seriously. And I met at the time a man who had a small label in Paris, specialized mostly on the world music.
yeah,
And he listened to it. It was a cassette. He listened to it and he liked it very much. And he said that he would like to, release it on his label. And that was Editions Nech, it was called. It was a man named, we're still good friends with Patrick. His name is Patrick. And so he, and thanks to him, we were able to now finish the work and have them become CDs. And he's the one who actually, so we signed to his label, which is a very small label. And so we produced the 3 following albums with Patrick on Editions Nech. And he's the one who actually, gave us more visibility, because he, even though the labels at the time were sort of dying out, independent labels, the smaller ones were able to sustain for some time. So that's when we got some attention from the French avant-garde Gothic scene. There were magazines like Elegy for the French, D-Side. There were some webzines like Guts of Darkness, Indie Pop Rock, and some obscure. They're still continuing, by the way, some of them. So, we got some attention I wasn't expecting at all, because we're really doing it for ourselves, to be honest.
yeah. I mean, it's beautiful that people take the chance and do the stuff that they like. Not many people do that. I mean, people are afraid. Like in my case, right? I'm a computer scientist. I have my day job. I do well, and but music is my passion. So during the pandemic, I opened one radio. I sent the link to my friend. They like it. Then open another one. Then I open another one, and I thought in whatever it was, March or April 2020, I thought, well, all these musicians are not touring. There's COVID. This might be at home. Maybe they are bored. So I started sending emails to people. Nobody
Yeah.
would ping me back, and then eventually I got a hold of Steve Hackett from Genesis, and that was my first interview. And then,
Incredible.
huh?
That's a hell of a first interview.
Oh yeah, and I got lucky with that one. And then I interviewed another person from Genesis, and little by little, I learned the process. I wasn't sure at the beginning. The first thing interview probably what to ask, how you conduct, and I found a niche, and I thought, man, I really like this stuff. I want to create like a
Yeah.
a way to start uploading stuff to YouTube, prefer the radio and the YouTube, and a way to an archive, musical archive, if you will, for future generation too. Because my interviews are long, I talk with deeper stuff. I get to know the musician, right? They're different, and people like the stuff, and it went from there. And in the real world, I'm very shy, and now I'm calling people all over the world, man. So I don't know.
I think it's fantastic. I think it's really, well, I think all of us, we detect, we sense when something is being done with no reason other than, the love of what you do. And I think that maybe it sounds, as you get older, you get more comfortable with that as well.
Yeah, yeah,
I think at some point, to me, it was when we were 18, 19, I think you have too many gods, you're still trying to, trying to sound like someone or be like someone and it's all, it all kind of, you can sense that. As you get older, you sort of shed all that. And then you find yourself, and artistically, I think that's the most interesting moment, when you're just no longer interested in trying to or necessarily look for recognition. That's not a good reason to do what you do. I think what's good, the only good reason to do what you do is just because you love it. And when you wake up in the morning, you want to listen to what you recorded the night before, because you just want to get to it again, and you just want to, create your own little world, and where you were really safe and secure.
Yeah, absolutely.
But,
you gotta follow your passion and do it. I mean, I know that I have an accent, and I always say, man, who will get back to me? And I'm not a musician. I know a lot of music. I have a huge music collection. Music has always been part of my life. As I mentioned before, I listen every single day of my life, 2-3 hours of music every day. In the morning before I go to work, in the afternoon, at night. I buy a lot of music on a weekly basis, between record labels sending me stuff and CDs, vinyl, I don't know, 30, 40 a week. So I consume a lot of stuff. I see close to where I live, close to Washington, D.C., I see close to, I don't know, 40, 50 shows a year. Every band come this way. The big one, the smaller one. So I spend a lot of music. So I wasn't a musical, I wasn't a critic, and I don't play any instrument, I don't know how to read music, but I knew a lot of music, and that's how it started for me. I thought, what the heck, I need to do it. I like music, why not start calling people? And at the beginning it was hard, and then little by little, I move up, I learned the process, I began pinging agents, using social media, and I'm close to the guy with all the big name. Eventually, right now, for example, people like Eric Clapton or Pink Floyd, the Led Zeppelin, or the rest of Genesis, they are out of reach for me. But hey, I'm closing the gap, man. So I want to talk to all of them, because music
yeah, I think that once people sense sincerity, that reach is no longer as difficult.
Yeah, the only difficulty is here in your mind,
Yeah. Yeah, it's Really, there isn't much to say. Once thing it's done by passion and sincerely, it seems to touch all of us.
Right. And then so back to you, and so you put the 2-3 albums together. Were you able to tour a little bit, like a small cafes, a small theater, and
Yeah, well, in the beginning, it was definitely a studio project because I didn't think in terms necessarily of having great musicians to get that sincerity we're talking about, and that particular specificness of each person, whether it be Gerard, Beatrice, because what was important was the album. But then Patrick from the label suggested that we do some live shows, which I was all for. But since we're not technically really good to reproduce what we're doing in studio on stage, and it was complicated because I was doing a lot of instruments on the studio albums, a lot of layering. I was doing a lot of the rhythm programming and all that. So, I could only do so much on stage. I was doing a lot of sequencing. So we ended up finding a drummer who was in the village where I was living, a Swedish girl, Mia, who was a music teacher in the village where I was living in Normandy. And she had heard about me. I'd heard about her because we're the only foreigners living in the village. So I just went to her farm. She lived in a farm, and I knocked on her door with our first album in my hand, and I said, we're looking for a drummer. I know you drum. If you're interested, give me a call. She called me the next day. So she said, I listened to the album last night. I love it, and I'm in. So we became 4. So we had a Swedish woman. We had me from the States. We had Beatrice, who was living in Paris at the time, and we had Gerard, who's Armenian background, living in Paris at the time. So we actually started working really almost every weekend, and me every day on my end, trying to arrange the stuff for the stage so that I'd prepare things to work on for the weekends. And I remember going to Paris. I was trying to look for a place to play where we could play regularly, sort of like a residency. And one day I remember it was a spring day. I walked off to some suburb in Paris because they told me there was a small tiny club, and I figured it won't be too difficult to get us a booking. So I found this place called the Menuiserie, which was a small 30-40 seater club, and they liked enough what we're doing where the guy who was running the place gave me his calendar and a pencil for me to pencil in all the dates I wanted for the year. So I took all the weekends. I took almost all the weekends, not all of them obviously, but almost all the weekends. And what I wanted to do is instead of doing concerts, because we weren't good enough to call them concerts for me, I called them rehearsal concerts. So we would present the shows as rehearsal gigs. So anybody could come and sort of witness what we're doing on stage as a band, rehearsing, which would justify if we're not good, if we're making mistakes,
Sure.
It's a rehearsal. It's not a real gig, which is how it started in my mind. But of course, once you start getting dates and once you start getting people in front of you, you want to do it right anyway. So very quickly, the rehearsals became just normal gigs.
It will become normal gigs after that, and where you making enough money to at least pay for gas, because you needed to. All of you were living outside Paris, so you need to go there every weekend, right? So.
Yeah, well, with the exception of me, who had decided that I would be only doing music living in the countryside, away from the city, where my expenses were extremely low, because, living in the countryside and France compared to the city, it's really much cheaper. So I was able to, sustain my financial situation just enough. But the others, well, Gerard was also only doing music. Mia was continuing her lessons, she had maybe 50 students that she was, teaching drums or piano to. She played piano as well. Beatrice was studying at the time to become a therapist, which she became. She's also a psychotherapist, Beatrice. So she was able to sustain with her side, main job, which was making the money for her. And yes, we're able to just get by, but we weren't making money, that's for sure. I mean, sometimes we're losing money. We're definitely not making much money, but we're not, we were able to sustain ourselves for the gas and all that, because yes, I was driving. The shows would end up, from 8 o'clock to, let's say we'd finish 30 or 11, whatever. Then we'd hang out at the place, drinks, dinner, what have you. And by the time we got back, we'd pack all the van. We'd get back at 2, 3 in the morning, back into the countryside. So yeah, there were good times. I mean, in retrospect, I love those times, because it's that exciting moment where something is beginning, and you're doing it just for doing it. You don't know where it's going to go, but it takes very little for you to get excited about things. It takes the one good gig. It takes being satisfied of what you're doing, between what you've prepared and what you are presenting. Some coherence is happening. All of a sudden, a band is taking form. And yeah, there were exciting times, and then we ended up doing more gigs. Some people would hear about us. We did a place called Divan du Monde in Paris, which is an important venue, and we did a lot of venues in those first few years that just sort of happened. I don't even remember how they happened exactly, but some of them we were finding them. Some that contact us because of word of mouth, internet. The internet was also very, played an important role at the time. It was just coming into, everyone's lives. We got invited to Armenia to do a tour because of an internet meeting with a man who was apparently listening to our music and liked it enough, and invited us to tour Armenia in 2007.
Wow!
Which was a very, very exceptional thing for us to do at the time, because we were only about 7 years old as a band, and we were still, learning our craft. I've been doing music since the age of 18, but it's always a learning process. It never stops.
Yeah.
It
That's
never
how you
stops.
end up, and after that, I think you guys start beginning playing bigger venues more often. Instead of losing money, perhaps breaking even or making a little money, and you end up being touring here in the United States as well, right? We're talking about what, 2008, 2009? Yeah.
Yeah, we toured in the States. Yes, it was quite, gradually, which is what I wanted. I didn't want anything too radical, because
Correct. Yeah.
I wanted to make sure that we're controlling our stage environment, and we don't kind of go over our heads. So I wanted it to be gradual, and it did work out that way. We went to the States for the first time in 2011 or 12, if I'm not mistaken. And we played it safe in that we went to the places that I knew, California mainly. So we did some gigs in LA, San Francisco. Then the following year we went out to Portland. Oakland we have some memorable gigs that we did in Oakland, and we go back to almost every time we go back to the States, we go by Oakland. We made some good friends there. And yeah, we did the States times, and we did some bigger venues. I think the biggest venue at the time was a place called Zipper Hole. It's in downtown LA. I think it's like a 450-seat venue, which was probably our first big venue at the time. And then we kept doing what we were doing, making albums, recording, creating, composing, what have you. And we didn't really stop doing the small venues. I always liked doing the small venues. I still like doing this.